The first fine showed up in my mailbox the same day I finished polishing the '67 Shelby GT 500. I just spent the better part of the weekend under that hood, wiping down chrome like it was sacred. I opened the envelope expecting some generic HOA newsletter junk. Instead, I found a large red violation notice stamped across the top like I was some kind of criminal. Improper storage of non-operational vehicles. Immediate fine, $1,000. I blinked, then laughed. It was signed, of course, by Amanda Greeley, head of the Lakelo Estates HOA. A woman who looked like she'd been born with a clipboard in one hand and a glass of Chardonnay in the other. Now, to be clear, I don't keep junk. I collect vintage cars. My garage is insulated, climate-controlled, and more organized than most operating rooms. I've got 5 classic beauties in there, all worth a mint. The Shelby, a '54 Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, a '69 Plymouth Road Runner, a pristine '71 Hemi Cuda, and a rare '73 Porsche Carrera RS, combined. About $2.4 million in steel and history. I marched down to the HOA office the next morning. Amanda sat behind the desk like she was running the Pentagon. Her blonde bob was perfectly shellacked and her lips curled in that permanent, "I know better than you" way. "You Gregory Kearns?" she asked, not looking up from her laptop. "Yeah. I live on Winding Cedar Drive. Got a violation notice yesterday," she cut me off. "Yes, your garage has multiple vehicles that appear to be non-operational. We've had complaints." "Non-operational?" I raised an eyebrow. "Those are restored classics. They're insured, registered, and worth more than half the houses in this neighborhood." Amanda finally looked up. "We don't allow junk cars to be stored in garages. Residents are expected to maintain a certain standard." "They're not junk," I said, holding back a laugh. "I've got documentation, titles, appraisals, hell, I've even got them insured with Hagerty." She leaned back in her chair and gave me that look, you know the one, like I was a child interrupting her book club. "Mr. Kearns, the HOA defines a non-operational vehicle as one that has not moved in 30 days. Our records indicate that none of your vehicles have left your property. You've been monitoring my garage." She didn't flinch. "Residents have the right to report concerns. We received multiple complaints. From what I understand, your garage door is sometimes open." That was true. I left it open when I worked inside. Didn't know that was now a criminal offense. "Let me make this clear," I said. "These cars are investments. I have every legal right to keep them." Amanda pulled out a folder and slid it toward me. "This is your first notice, but if the situation isn't remedied within 10 days, we'll escalate to daily fines, up to $500 per day." I took the folder without looking at it. "You're making a mistake, a big one." She smiled like a villain in a soap opera. "We're simply enforcing the rules, Mr. Kearns. It's nothing personal." I left the office with a knot forming in my gut. I knew what this was. Amanda and her little HOA cronies didn't like that a guy like me, blue-collar, self-made, tattooed, and loud about engines, lived in their pristine, beige kingdom of silence. But she had no idea who she was messing with. I didn't make it through 20 years in the Marines, 2 overseas tours, and a decade running a restoration shop by backing down from a fight. I wasn't just going to prove my garage was legal. I was going to expose just how far Amanda and her HOA were willing to bend or break the rules to keep people like me out. And by the time I was done, she'd wish she'd never heard the words junk car. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. The next morning, I pulled out my old file box from the top shelf in the garage, the one labeled legal and licensing. I hadn't touched it in years. Dust floated through the beam of light coming in through the side window as I opened the lid. Inside were copies of every title, registration, and insurance document for each car I owned. I laid them out on my workbench like a general reviewing troop formations. Every single vehicle was registered, insured, and appraised. I even had photos from national car shows where I'd won ribbons, proof that these machines weren't just operational, they were award-winning. None of this had stopped Amanda from fabricating a violation, which meant she was banking on the average homeowner being too intimidated to push back. I wasn't average. I scanned all the documents and organized them by VIN. Then, I cross-referenced the HOA's own bylaws. Nowhere did it say vehicles had to leave the property on a schedule. The clause Amanda referenced, non-operational, was vague and intentionally so. It gave the board room to interpret things however they pleased. But what Amanda didn't count on was that I had a cousin who worked in municipal code enforcement downtown. I gave him a call. "Greg, you know this is the kind of stuff I usually avoid getting into," he said as soon as I explained the situation. "I'm not asking you to go to war," I replied. "I just need to know if an HOA can invent a definition that overrides the city's vehicle code." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Send me the exact language they used in the violation." I emailed it over. 30 minutes later, he called back. "Yeah, this is garbage." The city defines a non-operational vehicle as one without valid registration or visible signs of disrepair. Your cars don't even come close. If they're inside a fully enclosed structure, the HOA has no jurisdiction over their usage. "Appreciate it," I said. "You just gave me my first chess piece." I wasn't going to charge in just yet. I needed to see how deep the rot went. So that afternoon, I walked over to my neighbor across the street, Janelle. She was a quiet nurse who kept to herself, but I remembered seeing a warning notice posted on her front door a few weeks back. She opened the door cautiously, then relaxed when she saw me. "Oh hey, Greg," she said. "Everything okay, actually," I said. "I wanted to ask about that notice you got last month. Was it from the HOA?" Her face tightened. "Yeah. They fined me for weeds in my flower bed, said it was a blight on community aesthetics. I was working double shifts at the hospital that week. I barely had time to sleep, let alone weed." "They give you a warning first?" "Nope, just the fine, $500. I tried to fight it, but the appeals committee is just Amanda and two guys she plays tennis with." I nodded. "You still have the notice?" She disappeared for a minute and came back with a yellowed envelope. I asked if she'd mind if I took a photo of it. She hesitated, then handed it over. "Be careful," she said. Amanda doesn't like people asking questions. That evening, I walked my dog around the neighborhood. I wasn't trying to be nosy, but I kept an eye out for similar notices. I spotted 4 more, one taped to a trash can behind a privacy fence, another on a mailbox. Each one had a different violation, but the fines were similar, between $500 and $1,000. Suspiciously, all the people getting fined were the same types: retirees, single parents, or people without the time or means to push back. No one in the gated cul-de-sacs at the top of the hill had anything posted. No violations, no warning letters. It wasn't enforcement. It was targeting. The next morning, I drove downtown and filed a public records request for the HOA's most recent financial disclosures. As a registered nonprofit in the state, they were required to submit annual reports. When I got the documents, I flipped straight to the budget allocations. Line item: Community Improvement Fund $62,000. Line item: Legal Reserve $7,800. Line item: MISC. Enforcement Revenue $94,300. That last one made me sit back. $94,000. In 1 year. Collected from fines, most of them likely fabricated. That wasn't maintenance, that was racketeering. With a smile, I printed out the financials and added them to my growing file. Next stop, my buddy Chris. He worked at a regional news outlet and owed me a favor. Back when I was restoring my first Road Runner, he'd crashed his bike and I did all the bodywork on his Harley for free. I showed up at his office and laid out the documents on his desk. "You're telling me your HOA fined you for having 2 million in vintage cars inside your own garage," he said. 2.4, I corrected him, "and it gets worse. They've been hitting up half the neighborhood with fake violations and raking in the fines." Chris glanced through the photos, the notices, the financials. He whistled low. "I can work with this. You okay going public?" Let Amanda try to silence me, I said. I want every homeowner in this place to know what she's doing. He scanned the documents, then nodded. I'll run it by legal. If it checks out, this could be front page. By the time I got home that night, I had a plan, but I didn't expect what I found waiting for me. A second violation notice pinned directly to my front door with a thumbtack. This one read, "Unauthorized commercial activity on residential property. Fine, $2,500. I nearly laughed. Apparently, Amanda now believed my garage was a business, my guess. She caught wind that I was digging and decided to retaliate. But she'd made a major mistake. Running a business would require a license, advertising, customer traffic, all things I didn't have. She was trying to fabricate a zoning violation, which put her dangerously close to filing false claims with the city. That's when I made the call to my lawyer. "Greg," she said after I explained, "this is textbook abuse of authority. If they're issuing fines with no basis and you've got documentation of it, we can file a civil suit, possibly even a class action if other residents come forward." "Good," I said. "Because I've got neighbors ready to talk." I spent the next 3 evenings walking door to door, carefully and respectfully. I wasn't confrontational. I just asked if people had been fined recently and if they'd ever had a chance to appeal. Most hadn't. A few had tried, only to be ignored or dismissed with vague language about community standards. By the end of the week, I had signed statements from 12 households, all with nearly identical stories. Fines issued without warning, appeals denied. And in every case, the homeowners had never received an actual copy of the governing documents Amanda claimed to enforce. I submitted the evidence to my lawyer. Chris, meanwhile, had his article ready. He called me the night before it went live. "Legal approved it," he said. And get this, we pulled Amanda's name through county court records. She used to be on another HOA board in a different subdivision. That HOA was dissolved after a federal audit uncovered unreported funds. My stomach tightened. How much? Over 120 grand. Never recovered. The next morning, the article dropped. Front page, full spread, title, "Fines, Fraud, and Vintage Cars, HOA Under Fire in Lake Hello Estates." The story exploded. By noon, every door in the neighborhood had a copy printed and taped to it. Someone even stapled it to the HOA bulletin board by the clubhouse. Amanda called an emergency board meeting that evening. I attended, along with half the neighborhood. By then, local news stations had picked up the story. I spotted 2 reporters in the back row. Amanda entered the room looking paler than I'd ever seen her. The usual smugness was gone, replaced by a brittle calm. "We're here to address some recent misunderstandings," she began. I stood up. "No misunderstanding here. You fined me on false grounds, used HOA authority to shake down residents, and now you're trying to cover it up." She ignored me. "The board has agreed to suspend all outstanding violations pending review." A man in the crowd yelled, "We want your resignation." Someone else shouted, "Where's the money, Amanda?" And then the final nail. A uniformed officer entered the room and asked for Amanda by name. He had a folder in one hand and a city inspector by his side. The officer turned to the crowd. "We've received multiple reports of fraudulent enforcement practices. As of today, the HOA's financial records are under investigation." Amanda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Justice was already in gear, and this time, Amanda couldn't find her way out. Amanda didn't show up for the next board meeting. Instead, the HOA clubhouse was guarded by a man who introduced himself as interim compliance chair, a wiry guy in a navy blazer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He cleared his throat and read from a prepared statement, something about temporary restructuring and ongoing collaboration with municipal oversight entities. Translation: Amanda had bolted and the board was trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. I stayed in the back of the room, arms folded, watching. Most of the community had shown up again, this time with sharpened focus. No yelling, no chaos, just a cold, simmering patience. Everyone had seen the article. Everyone had read the follow-up piece Chris ran the day after, detailing how the HOA had skipped multiple audit requirements and failed to disclose over $70,000 in annual spending. A few residents whispered about Amanda's house being dark for 2 days straight. Someone else mentioned spotting a moving van early that morning. No one had seen her since the officer showed up with the inspector. The police weren't done either. 2 days later, a detective from the county financial crimes unit showed up at my door. He introduced himself as Detective Harlan, middle-aged, clean-cut, with a notepad tucked under one arm and a pair of tired eyes that looked like they'd seen too many tax fraud cases and not enough justice. "I'm following up on the HOA situation," he said. "You were listed as the primary source in the press coverage." I stepped aside to let him in, and he took a seat at the kitchen table, scanning the documents already laid out. He didn't touch them, just glanced across the pages. "Did you personally deliver any funds to the HOA that you now believe were fraudulently solicited?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I have sworn statements from people who did. Some of them paid multiple fines over the past year without ever receiving a hearing." He nodded slowly. "We have a subpoena for the HOA's bank records. What we're looking for now is evidence of misappropriation. Do you know if any of the board members had access to the account outside of authorized expenditures?" I pulled out a photo I'd taken from the clubhouse bulletin board months ago. It showed Amanda holding a novelty check during a so-called community beautification fundraiser. The amount, $15,000. The funny thing was, the check never matched any of the actual spending reports. "That check never hit the books," I told him. There was no line item for beautification in the final quarterly report, and none of the board members could name where that money went when we started asking. Harlan took a picture of the photo with his phone. "That's helpful. We've already frozen the HOA's accounts. If funds were diverted, we'll trace them." Later that week, our lawyer filed a civil complaint on behalf of 23 residents. The suit accused the HOA of operating outside its legal charter, issuing illegal fines and violating due process protections guaranteed under our governing documents. Each resident included specific examples. Some had receipts, others had emails, and a few even had audio recordings where board members made veiled threats about escalating fines if payment wasn't received promptly. The real break came from a woman named Lorraine, a retired accountant who had served briefly on Amanda's finance subcommittee before resigning. I met her during a neighborhood cleanup day organized in the wake of the scandal. She approached me cautiously, clutching a manila envelope. "I kept copies," she said. "Amanda never knew." I didn't trust her. Inside were spreadsheets showing duplicate transactions, funds marked as maintenance that matched perfectly with deposits into a separate private account under Amanda's name. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. That envelope went straight to Detective Harlan. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. 2 squad cars rolled up to Amanda's house just as the sun was coming up. She answered the door in a silk robe, visibly startled. The cuffs snapped on without ceremony. She was charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying financial records, 3 felonies and 1 misdemeanor. The footage leaked by a neighbor ended up on the local evening news. Amanda didn't speak as she was led into the back of the cruiser. By then, the city had appointed a temporary receiver to oversee the HOA's operations. His name was Marcus Dolly, a no-nonsense lawyer with a background in nonprofit compliance. He hosted a town hall that weekend and laid out the next steps. "We will audit every fine issued over the past 3 years, Marcus announced. "If you've been charged improperly, you will be refunded. If board members acted outside their authority, they will be held personally liable." The room broke into quiet applause, controlled but cathartic. Marcus continued. "Effective immediately, all enforcement activity is suspended. No new violations, no new fees until this community votes on a new board." The election was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I didn't plan on running, but my name ended up on the ballot anyway. Apparently, someone nominated me during the town hall and enough people seconded it to lock me in. I didn't campaign. I didn't need to. The night of the vote, my wife and I sat on the porch, watching cars trickle toward the clubhouse. Folks waved as they passed. A few even stopped to drop off thank you baskets. One had a bottle of whiskey. Another held a stack of hand-drawn cards from a neighbor's kids. I won the seat with 86% of the vote. The first thing I did was motion to dissolve the current fine structure and replace it with a peer review panel. 3 homeowners randomly selected each month to weigh in on enforcement actions. No more unchecked authority. No more vague language. Every citation had to be reviewed, and every homeowner had a right to respond before any financial penalty was assessed. I also pushed for a full forensic audit not just of Amanda's term but of the previous 2 boards. We found irregularities going back 6 years. Funds that vanished. Payments made to shell companies. It wasn't just Amanda. She'd inherited a system already tilted toward exploitation. We handed everything over to the authorities. The next month, I helped draft a new charter. It required board members to take annual ethics training and instituted term limits. No one could serve more than 2 consecutive years without a community-wide vote of confidence. We even built in a clause for automatic recall if a certain percentage of residents signed a petition. By the end of the year, Lake Hello estates looked different. People left their garage doors open again. Kids played football in the street without someone threatening to issue a noise complaint. Janelle started a community garden in the cul-de-sac median, and no one tried to fine her for unauthorized landscaping. The clubhouse, once a symbol of control, became a space for potlucks and movie nights. The cars in my garage, they stayed right where they belonged. Every once in a while, I'd take the Road Runner or the Hemi out for a spin, just to remind myself what freedom sounded like in second gear. Amanda eventually took a plea deal. 5 years probation, a ban on serving on any board of directors, and full restitution of the stolen funds. I heard she moved to a rental unit in another county. No HOA. Sometimes, justice doesn't just show up in a courtroom. Sometimes it rolls in on 4 wheels, with a rumbling exhaust and the full weight of a community behind it. And for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood finally felt like home. 2 weeks after the vote, I parked the Shelby in front of the clubhouse for the first time and left the hood up. It wasn't a flex. It was a statement. The engine gleamed under the morning sun, every wire and gasket cleaner than anything in the HOA's old budget report. I didn't have to say a word. People walking by stopped to admire it. A teenager riding his bike slowed down, then circled twice just to get a better look. One of the newer residents, a quiet guy named Omar who just moved in from out of state, came over and asked if it was the original 428 Cobra jet engine. I nodded and told him yes. Then I opened the passenger door and let him sit inside. In the background, the clubhouse door creaked open. Inside, Marcus Dolly was preparing for the community restructuring meeting. It was our first official session under the newly ratified charter. No one wore suits. No one sat on a platform. We arranged folding chairs in a circle and anyone could speak. Omar shook my hand before heading inside. "You know," he said, "they told me during escrow that this was a strict neighborhood. I didn't realize that meant living under an actual racket." "Not anymore," I said. The meeting lasted just over 90 minutes. We reviewed the revised operating rules, confirmed the appointment of 2 new board members, and approved the hiring of a third-party accounting firm out of the city. Every transaction going forward would be double verified. Receipts would be posted on the community portal. No exceptions. Toward the end, an older woman named Doris raised her hand. "I've lived here for 17 years, she said. "This is the first time I haven't been afraid of opening my mailbox." That earned a murmur of agreement. Even Marcus cracked a grin. After the meeting, I stayed behind to help stack chairs. While folding the last one, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I considered ignoring it, but something told me to answer. "Mr. Kearns," a man's voice said. "This is Ada Salgado with the county prosecutor's office. You submitted documentation regarding the Lake Hello Estates HOA." "That's right," I said. "We've been expanding the investigation. Thought you should know there's now a criminal case against not just Amanda Greeley, but 2 former board members. Money laundering, wire fraud, and falsification of public records." "2 more?" I asked. "Yes, we believe they coordinated with Amanda to funnel funds through a fictitious contractor. The company's listed address is a P.O. box in Nevada. The money was withdrawn in cash increments to avoid bank reporting thresholds." I walked out to the street, away from the clubhouse, keeping my voice low. "How much are we talking about?" "Based on our review, roughly $138,000 over a 4-year period. Most of it diverted from what was labeled as infrastructure improvements." I leaned against a street lamp. "Let me guess," I said. "Nothing was ever improved." "Correct. We've also confirmed that the fines issued to residents were illegally enforced. The board failed to follow their own due process policies. It's likely the judge will nullify all outstanding violations and order restitution." "How long before the trial?" "Grand jury next month. We'll be reaching out to you again. Your testimony will help establish pattern and motive." I hung up and exhaled slowly. The weight that had settled over the neighborhood for years was lifting, piece by piece. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Lorraine's place. She answered the door with gardening gloves still on, dirt smudged across her cheek. I handed her a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "Copy of the court filing. You're listed as one of the primary whistleblowers." She blinked, then took the folder gently. "I didn't think anyone would care," she said. "When I stepped down from the finance subcommittee, I figured they'd just cover it up again." "They tried," I said. "But you made it impossible." She looked down at her hands, then whispered, "Good." By the following week, the neighborhood was holding its first community event in years, a barbecue at the park near the lake. No one asked for permits. No one got fined. People brought crockpots, folding tables, coolers. Kids played tag between the trees while someone set up a speaker blasting classic rock. I backed the Hemi onto the grass and popped the trunk. Inside were sodas, charcoal, and a stack of hot dog buns. A few people wandered over to take a look at the engine. I didn't mind. That's what the cars were for, sharing. Chris from the paper showed up halfway through with a camera slung around his neck. "You know," he said while grabbing a plate, "this story's been picked up by a few national outlets. One of them wants to do a feature on HOA reform efforts across the country." "Good," I said. "More people need to know how deep the rot can go. Any advice for homeowners stuck in similar situations?" I looked around, at the kids, at the folding chairs, at the neighbors laughing over paper plates. "Document everything," I said. "Don't let fear keep you quiet, and never underestimate what a group of angry homeowners can do when they stop playing defense." Chris nodded and jotted it down. That night I got a call from my lawyer. The civil suit had reached a settlement. Each resident who had been fined illegally would receive full reimbursement, plus damages. The HOA's insurance provider had agreed to cover most of the payout, but Amanda and the other 2 board members would be personally responsible for a portion. Their assets were already being evaluated for seizure. "Your testimony and documentation saved us months of discovery," my lawyer said. "You didn't just stop a fraud, you built the case that brought it down." I thanked her and hung up. The next morning, I went for a drive. Just me and the road runner. I took the long way out past the edge of town, where the roads curved through the hills and nothing stood between the tires and the horizon. It was quiet out there. No rules, no paperwork, just the hum of the engine and the wind pushing through the window. When I came back through the gates of Lake Hello Estates, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I wasn't the guy with the loud garage or the questionable lawn furniture. I was a neighbor, a board member, a part of something better, and Amanda, she wouldn't be coming back. The trial made headlines. All 3 defendants took plea deals. Amanda was sentenced to 18 months in county custody, followed by supervised release and a ban from managing any financial accounts not in her own name. The other 2 board members received suspended sentences and were ordered to complete 100 hours of community service, ironically, some of it in our own neighborhood. No one greeted them when they came to repaint the clubhouse fence. No one offered them lemonade. They worked in silence, wearing county-issued vests while the rest of us watched from porches and driveways. That was justice, too, quiet, unceremonious, but undeniable. A month later, we held another election, this time for the Community Advisory Panel. 3 volunteers would be selected every quarter to review resident concerns and propose improvements. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about inclusion. Janelle, the nurse, was elected unanimously. So was Omar. The 3rd spot went to Doris, who stood up and told everyone she'd never voted for anything in her life until this year. We all clapped. As for me, I stepped back from the board after my term ended. I didn't need a title. I had my garage, my cars, and a neighborhood that finally felt like it belonged to the people who lived in it, not the ones who tried to control it. I still get letters. Emails from homeowners in other states asking how we did it. I tell them the truth. It takes work. It takes guts. And sometimes, it takes an engine louder than the lies they try to bury you with. But it's worth it. Because when the dust settles and the silence returns, what stays behind isn't fear or fines or phony rules. It's freedom. And that's the kind of horsepower no HOA can ever hold.